But I spent some time at the High Performance Center in Spain. I spent a year training over there with those guys, and that was the Spain was number 2 in the world back then, and they were the High Performance Center there in Barcelona was kind of the world mecca of Taekwondo, and that was the place that everybody wanted to be at. What we used to do all the time, we'd play these different games. We'd play, dodgeball, or we'd play, like bull rush kind of game, or we'd play football or something just as a warm up. And so what you're driving attention to an unfamiliar or an unfamiliar game. You are driving this level of alertness because you want to win. It was a fun little warm up game that we play, but there was a really high level of alertness. And there's a consequence. You're playing for points, and everybody there is highly competitive. So there's a degree of urgency. So we played these warm-up games for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then when the coach is then going to try and give us new technical drills, everybody's really switched on, paying attention. Everybody's nervous system was in a state where forming new synaptic connections was made more easy by the warm-up drills that we've been doing.
That was Scott Robinson, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our longtime sponsor, Simply Faster. There are a lot of sports technology companies out there, but Simply Faster is the only website you can go to that features an online store that covers the bandwidth of training technology, from force plates to timing systems to muscle stimulators and more. Some products of Simply Faster that I use and love include things like the Freelap timing system in K-Box, or coaches' favorites such as GymAware. Recently, Simply Faster has added 2 units that as a coach you should definitely take a look at. The first is the Muscle Lab Contact Grid, which is an extremely affordable and portable, step-by-step, literally, system to collect data on jumps, bounds, sprints, agility, hurdle hops, and really as much as your creative mind can imagine. In what used to take a whole runway worth of data collecting strips, the Contact Grid does it all with only 2 small strips that together cover up to 40 meters of sprinting. Ground contact time, step rates, rhythms, and beyond are at your fingertips with this device. Another new unit, the VO2 Master, is an ultra-portable gas exchange analyzer. Don't guess on energy system development when you can get direct insight into VO2 capabilities in relation to specific sports skills, rather than being hooked up to tubes on a treadmill, or worse yet, a cycle ergometer to get a VO2 max. Think of the VO2 Master as your own gas exchange lab without the tubes and wires. Deepen your analysis in the specific conditioning preparation of your athletes with the VO2 Master today. These products and incredible customer service make Simply Faster your go-to for your sports technology needs. I'm happy to have partnered with them in sponsoring this podcast. Their support has been tremendous, so check them out today at simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. What's up, everybody? Today, we are talking about the nervous system, adaptation to training, neurological blockages and limiters, and how to overcome them to reach our highest potential as athletes and human beings. To that end, I am stoked to have Scott Robinson on the show today. Scott is a neurologist and personal trainer with over 20 years of experience. He is an applied movement neurology, or AMN, master practitioner. He's a former high-level Taekwondo athlete, as well as having track and field competitive experience. Scott has worked with the full gamut of neurological issues, disorders, things holding people back from reaching their highest potential as athletes and human beings. And so that's exactly what we're going to get into on the show today. Quick background as well. I was acquainted with Scott actually through the wonderful world of social media. I came across just a lot of his posts over the last year, and they've really been resonating with me in what I'm seeing in athletes and athletic performance and my own training. And so I'm really happy I reached out to him. We have an awesome show lined up for you on breaking through mental and neurological barriers and enhancing motor learning. And so the first half of the show today, we're going to get into just that, neurological roadblocks in the nervous system, things that are holding us back from a bioelectric standpoint, an emotional standpoint, and we're going to talk about concepts on clearing through those barriers. The second half of the show, we're going to get into a very critical aspect of training, which is that of attention and enhanced learning. So how do we set athletes up to have better training systems where they are more ready for the session, where they're taking more away from it, where there's intention, and where we're just in that state where we're hitting that sweet spot of training.
This was a really fantastic show, not only from a global perspective or from a kind of a overarching themes of training, but also in a practical nuts and bolts, how do we make changes on a daily basis to our process perspective? Again, an awesome show, and I'm thrilled to bring it to you guys here, episode 188 with Scott Robinson.
Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. It's always nice to talk to someone on the other side of the pond, or the Pacific Ocean, I guess you could say.
It's a big pond.
Yes, it is. Yeah, the connection. I always keep my fingers crossed for the connection, but we're doing great. Let's kick it off. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background as an athlete, trainer, and then how you got into neurology.
Yeah, cool. All right. So my name is Scott Robinson. I am known as the Brain Guy on Instagram and Facebook. So I started life as an athlete. So I was a cross country runner and a track athlete running in middle distance. I sort of just achieved national level, state representation and whatnot here in Australia. And, that was a real dream for me. I always wanted to be a runner, but I worked out, I wasn't going to be a world beater. So I was a highly competitive individual and I was pretty driven. So I was, just by the time I realized I wasn't going to make it to the Olympics in athletics, I was looking for something else. So I fell into Taekwondo and I competed internationally and represented Australia in Taekwondo for about 7 years. And that was a fantastic life while it lasted. And then from there, funnily enough, I got into construction of all things, which is a long way from where I am now. I did that for a few years, but I realized that was really incompatible with the life of being an athlete, and it just wasn't me. So I left construction in the interest of being a full-time athlete and traveling the world to compete. And then from there, I fell into personal training, and that really fit for me because I got to work with the body, I got to work with people, and it was flexible. So I started learning a lot more about the physiology of the body. And once I finished my athletic career, then I started to progress into rehabilitation training. And so I started to learn more about physiotherapy's approach towards solving movement challenges. And that was great for a while, but then kind of what dawned on me was it was really challenging to make long-term and effective change with those methods, because what I was working with was just inputting a stimulus into the body at the periphery and then trying to overcome signals that were coming from the central computer, so being the brain and the nervous system. So once I kind of had that realization, then really the next stop was the brain and the nervous system. So basically, if you're going to make changes on a deep and profound level, if you're going to make really, really impactful changes, especially in terms of human performance, if you're not going to pay attention to the governing systems of the body, which in the physical body are the brain and the nervous system, then you really can't expect to get the very most out of the body. And for me, applying my athletic levels of dedication and sort of my athlete's mindset to that work, I was prepared to sort of overturn every stone and just keep looking into all the unknowns. And I found the Academy of Applied Movement Neurology in London, and I started doing training with those guys. So I started training with them, and that was 6 years ago. And I progressed right the way through that education. That was absolutely mind-blowing to see the difference that was making on the clients that I was seeing every day. And as soon as I started seeing those results, I was hooked. So I was, studying every single day and reading and learning something new. And the pace that you can learn at is crazy fast. So exactly like we were just saying before about takeaways and being able to implement little tidbits that can actually impact you in your daily life. It's difficult for neuroscience to bridge that gap. We hear a lot of really, really exciting information coming out of science labs and from neuroscientists about what they're discovering, but then taking that and using that in usable ways that you or I can put into our training regimes is often difficult. And I found that this AMN approach was fantastic because it was really hands-on. And it allowed me to connect the neurology of the body with just performance in every day, and that's incredibly motivating because you see change on a dramatic scale and at a rapid rate. So that's been my last sort of 6 years or so. It's been a really steep learning curve, and I work with incredibly complex cases. So I have people with all kinds of traumatic brain injuries. I've got one person who's had half her brain removed. And then I work right through just regular people and even athletes, here and there. And so, yeah, I love what I get to do. I get to mentor and I get to teach within that system. I get to do a bit of work from home, and I still work in the gym and do movement, which has a huge value for me in my life. That's me in 500 words or less.
Fantastic. I love that you cover those ends of your training and studying the neurology and putting that together. And the leaving no stone unturned, that's something that I've been working on myself for, it's been about over 20 years now. It never ends. It never ends. We could learn for another 100 years and we wouldn't even be scratching the surface, I feel like, of this machine we have.
I'm on the same page with you right there. Absolutely.
So in the training world, I'm sure, and you mentioned it with the results you're getting, I'm sure you come across this all the time, and then in the studies and education you've done. But and as coaches or trainers or even athletes, we see this all the time, are elements that cause someone to not be able to express their full strength. Or from a nervous system brain perspective, what are some elements that hold us back, that cause our nervous system from holding back the strength that we're capable of producing?
Yeah, look, the answer, much like the nervous system itself, is complex. So there are a lot of different levels to it, and there are levels that we're affected by from outside our body, so in the environment and whatnot. We'll stick with the brain and the nervous system for the purposes of this talk. But so what I work with a lot of the time is bioelectricity. So bioelectricity underpins everything in the nervous system. So within medical science, we tend to focus on electrochemical relationships, and medical science tends to look at the body almost purely from a chemical kind of perspective. And I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people who are in that space, and the argument is always, no, it's just chemical and that's it. There's nothing else. But bioelectricity sort of runs on a level below that. And once you start to look at the extracellular matrix of the body, the extracellular matrix is basically what surrounds every single cell in our body, and it's kind of like the body's Wi-Fi network. So rather than just communication going down along hardwired nerves, spinal nerves that project out from the spinal cord, you have this Wi-Fi network within your body that keeps everything in communication with everything else in real time. So it's almost instant. It's pretty much instantaneous. So all the information, and the information is pretty much holographic, and a hologram basically means that all of the information of the hologram is contained in every single part of the hologram. So you could take a tiny little piece of your toenail, and that tiny little piece of your toenail contains all of the information that's in the entire organism. So bioelectricity is pretty much like that. So I work with that bioelectricity, and anywhere in the body that there is dysfunction or pain or weakness or anything that's just not quite right, what you will find is there will be an altered bioelectric charge. So if we just accept for the purpose of this discussion that there's a normal bioelectric charge that we should have when we're just sort of walking around and everything is great, anytime we have dysfunction, pain, injury, sadness, there'll be an altered bioelectric charge, which if we can find and we can navigate, that can bring us to a lot of answers as to why we're experiencing that pain, dysfunction, or weakness. So if you've been sick, if you had a virus, or you've had a bacterial infection, or you've had any kind of immune process, whether it's current or it's historic, you might have had a viral infection at age 3. That's imprinted in your immune system, and your nervous system knows about it. So that information is stored, and it's stored in your system for life. So it will project through the viscera, it will project through organs and project through glands, and those organs and glands are continuous with muscles in the somatic nervous system. So if you happen to come across a chemical stimulus like a smell that for whatever reason happens to make that previous immune response at age 3, if that makes that relevant in some way, it doesn't mean you're going to get sick again straight away, but the muscles that are connected or that are correlated with that immune event, they'll experience a reaction. There'll be a decrease in output, and they may get tighter, they may just get weaker. But that's the same with your immune system. It's the same with your circadian biology, the same with your gastrointestinal tract. So all of these deep neurologic systems, they're continuous with the muscles in the somatic nervous system. So if there's anything that happens to be wrong in these deeper systems, you'll experience a correlated weakness somewhere, or a correlated uh, increase in restriction or tightness somewhere in the musculature, which for me, when I first sort of started delving into that and finding that, was absolutely as an athlete, and made me just think, like, what if I'd known this information back then, this would have been a game changer. Because the thing for me as an athlete, and this may resonate with a lot of your listeners, what used to stress me on comp day was having put all that work in, and there were times I was training 6 days a week, 3 times a day, and you'd put all that work, all that training, all that emotional effort into a performance. And I just remember the feeling of I never ever felt like I had a guarantee that I could turn up and it'd be a good day. You know, I learned over time what correlated with good performances and what behaviors and what routines I needed to implement to increase my chances of a good performance. But I never ever knew how to guarantee a good performance out of my body. So understanding these systems and understanding that you can go through and you can scan and you can check them, or you can pay attention to them, and that will eliminate a lot of, it'll clear weakness or dysfunction at the level of the musculature. That's absolutely huge. So bioelectricity and the way that interacts with all the deeper neurological systems is absolutely huge. The next one for me that is hugely impactful is nociception. So nociception is, I describe it to people I work with as a noxious stimulus. So most people know what proprioception is. So proprioception is kind of healthy feedback. It's good. It's healthy sensory feedback that goes back to the brain, tells the brain where joints and different body parts are in space in real time. Okay, and so that the brain likes that information. It's really healthy. Let's say, for argument's sake, you've had a knee reconstruction, you've torn your ACL, you've had a knee reconstruction, or you've dislocated your shoulder. At that injury site, you will now experience a nociceptive stimulus, and that nociceptive information travels back to the brain and just tells the brain that that is an injured body part. It's an injured area. And if that information is strong enough, or if it's there for long enough, then it imprints on the brain, and the brain changes the picture that it holds in the brain maps of that particular body part. And so once the brain in the sensory cortex and the motor cortex is seeing these body parts as injured, then it'll always treat them that way. It'll drive compensation there, and it'll always treat them that way. So that's something for me that I see. That's probably one of the biggest things I see in terms of change when I get a hold of an athlete or a regular person, and we clear the brain map. Essentially, what we can do is we change the picture that the brain is holding of that body part, so the brain just sees it as new tissue once again, and then it can treat it like, treat it like clear, perfect musculature, and it just functions really well again. So restriction disappears and strength returns. But that's a huge one. Nociception is massive because every athlete's walking around with it. But I think it's not all bad. If you are an athlete, and this is what kind of goes to what we're talking about with movement variability before, you've got this incredible ability to compensate and create new pathways and new functions. So you can kind of compensate around it for a while. So athletes are much better at compensating around nociception than regular people, but it impacts on the body in significant ways. Threat circuitry is another one. Threat circuitry is something that's in the brainstem. So anything that has caused your nervous system to register that it's under, survival's under threat, or it's safety, or there's possibly going to be a painful stimulus on the other side of whatever object or experience it perceives. That once threat circuitry is activated, you'll kind of experience a restrictive feeling, or a holding back kind of feeling. You'll find you sort of hold back from committing to full output of the musculature. You might not jump as far or as high. If your nervous system perceives that there's a threat of using the muscles to that degree of force, or jumping across a certain distance, or over a certain object, if there happens, for whatever reason, happens to be a threat there active, that's going to drive down strength in the body in significant ways. And then you're just getting back to, I guess, kind of, it's at a different level, but the somatic nervous system is continuous with all of the organs and glands. So the somatic nervous system is basically voluntary movement. So all the muscles that we are voluntarily in control of, they're all continuous with every gland in the body, every organ in the body, and it's continuous with the brainstem as well, which is the most primitive part of the body, and that's what holds all the reflexes the all the reflexes that fire in the body. So everything's connected to everything, I guess, is the short answer. So there are a huge amount of things that can impact us, and the more that we can pay attention to optimizing the nervous system, then the greater the output's going to be at the level of the musculature.
Yeah, that was a really cool and thorough answer, and there's a few follow-ups to that. Some of the different things really got me thinking. The first one, you were talking about the bioelectric nature of the body, and I think it's such a powerful picture to think about the body as electric, or like Nikola Tesla said, thinking of things in energy, waves, and vibration, or it's like this. It just brings a kind of a different nuance, and I think about some of my experiences with like direct current muscle stimulation and the crazy sensations you get from doing that stuff. But what are some examples of how you might look at a client from a bioelectric perspective? Like how would you assess and integrate movements based off of bioelectricity?
Okay, so something that I do is I'll do orthopedic manual muscle testing. Okay, which that's not new. That's something that physiotherapists and manual therapists have been doing for since the day dot. So we'll test strength, test the output of the nervous system, and when you get weakness, then I'll check and see, is there an altered bioelectric charge at that point. So you can, if you would like to know if there's an altered bioelectric charge, or is there that alterance of bioelectric charge pointing you in the direction of dysfunction or weakness, something you can do, and this is really, really simple. You could do a range of movement test. You could do a strength test. So if you've never done sort of strength work or strength testing, I should say, so orthopedic manual muscle testing before, then I think the range of movement one is the easiest one for people to go with. You could just go with a simple roll down, as in just slowly just roll down and just see where your hands or your fingers come to rest, either down on your shins or down on your feet or down on the floor. And just do that and try and make it consistent. So you can soften the knees, breathe in, breathe out, close your eyes so you're not reaching towards a target, and just see where your fingers come to rest at the ground. Okay, that's a simple one that just about everybody can do. You could then, if you think that you're experiencing a weakness in a bicep, say, you could rub that bicep with the opposite hand, and what that's going to do is it's going to, if there is an altered bioelectric charge there, that will perturb that charge. And it kind of, the way I describe it to people that I work with is it kind of highlights it to the nervous system, where it draws the brain's attention to that bicep because you've just focused your intention on that bicep. Now, if there's an altered bioelectric charge there and the brain is now focused on it, then the degree of weakness or the degree of dysfunction there is kind of what the brain's focusing on, and that is going to bring about a response in the whole body. So we'd call it a global response feedback. So you would just do a regular range of movement test, call it for hamstrings, call it for posterior chain. You're just going to roll down, reach down, let your fingers just come to rest at your toes or on the floor or at whatever level they get to. Then you can start swiping or contacting different areas of the body and just make your test as consistent, as repeatable as you can. And you see which areas actually bring about an increase in range of movement. Now, if there's dysfunction at the level of the bicep, that is going to bring about a momentary relaxation in the musculature, and you'll roll down a little bit further. Okay, so it's just telling you that there's something going on at that bicep. Okay, and then from there, you kind of need to go and source out someone who knows about what they're doing to navigate through the nervous system and tell you why. But there'd be a relaxation which would increase the range of movement in the tissues, but it's also going to correlate with a weakness. So if you were to do it with a range of movement testing, with orthopedic manual muscle testing, the nervous system would momentarily go weak while you contact that bicep. So, and again, that's giving you that same feedback that there's just something that's not quite right there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense with a few different experiences I've had or systems of learning that I've gone through. One of which is called neurokinetic therapy. And that model, which involves muscle testing, it basically, if you have a muscle that tests weak, let's say I'm testing my psoas or something like that, and it tests weak, I could press on or just touch or have the client touch a related muscle, maybe the iliacus or quadricep. And if there was a problem in that muscle and you just touch it, all of a sudden the leg can hold strong. But it can't be anywhere. It always has to be kind of the affected area. And it was interesting because I'm always was trying to figure out, well, why? I've asked a lot of people that question, why? Why is it that you could just touch that area and all of a sudden it's almost like you connect the circuit. Like it's almost like there's a circuit and part of it was falling out and you put the circuit back on the track and now it can run through again. And it was explained to me as if there was like, so yeah, what you said kind of makes sense in that context.
Yeah, so think of it this way. And look, it can be a lot more complex than this, but one really simple way to explain it is think of it in terms of direct charge or direct current. So we have alternating currents. You think AC and DC. We've got alternating current, AC, and direct current, DC. So DC basically means voltage. So, and voltage, as far as the body's concerned, you can look at voltage as a capacity to do work. So if a muscle has a low direct current, then adding voltage to that muscle is all of a sudden going to increase capacity. Okay, it's going to increase the capacity to do work. Now, you can set that up just by setting up what we call a streaming potential. And a streaming potential is going to be when you just make contact to that tissue with fingers or hand or another body part. And there's ways to opt to it to increase that. So if you want to play with it, if you've got a weak muscle and you want to see if it's direct current, something that you can do, and this is really simple and it's kind of fun, is you can take your fingers. On most people, it'll be stronger through the right hand than the left, but play with it and check. But you can take your fingers and you can just contact that muscle. And again, you can see if it's weak, you can see if that returns some strength to it. The streaming potential will be greatest with the fingers at an angle of 45 degrees to the tissue, but it depends on which 45 degrees that you go on. So you kind of have to test whether you could look at it in terms of north, south, east, and west, which angle that 45 degrees is going on relative to the tissue. So it's a cool thing if you're a coach, when you've got an athlete that's coming to you and they're exhibiting weakness or they're complaining of a weakness in a particular muscle. It's just something that you can play with and check. You can see if you can do an orthopedic manual muscle test, you can just play around a little bit with direct current and see if you can add direct current. You may well be able to fix it on the spot. That's something that I do quite a bit. It may just, if you find the right angle that makes that muscle go strong, you're just going to need to hold it there for a period of time, and there's ways to work out how long, but essentially you can do it by trial and error. You can hold it there for a minute, then test again, see if it's strong. So it's a really cool little tip that you can play with if you've got athletes and you've got no experience of this stuff. That's something simple that you can just do and you can throw straight into play.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. That's great. It makes me think too, and this was another kind of follow-up or something that I was thinking about as you were describing the bioelectric nature was like foam rolling and lacrosse balls and even like basic like cross-frictional massage type techniques, like stuff that's all. And I think it's funny because like 10 years ago, people would say, oh, use a foam roller to iron out the knots in your muscles, as if it was magically doing that. And then it'd be, it's impacting the fascia. And there was a podcast I did with Quinn Hennick a while ago, a physical therapist who had said just how tough our fascia is. And it's as if the foam roller is really going to iron it out, or even the lacrosse ball. But yet, and that stuff actually really turned me off to using those tools, even though, honestly, I had always felt better after using them. But I was like, oh, well, these are dumb now. But then I've really come back to them recently just by noticing. I was like, look, like, I don't know. I think it's just something to do with the nervous system and attention. I'll just call a spade and say there's nothing on the soft tissue level. It's just a sensory drill. And I've been bringing them back, like tennis balls on the feet in the weight room and stuff. And I like it. And it makes all that stuff makes sense from a bioelectric perspective. I guess it's like it works, but it doesn't work the way you think it works, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Look, I think that the foam rollers and the lacrosse balls and that sort of stuff have their place. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm someone who probably, several years ago, I had a whole shopping bag full of, that I used to carry around of all these different, self-release tools. But yeah, so the thing is, so the connective tissues and particularly fascia's electrical. So, when we talk about, electrochemical. So when you're talking electrochemical, you're talking neurotransmitters and all those hardwired signals that are coming down through the spinal cord. Fascia's electrical. It's an amazing tissue because it holds all that stuff we were talking about before, the information that's in the immune system, in your circadian biology, that's, in your emotional, your limbic brain, all of that stuff, all of that is stored in fascia. Now, communication in fascia happens something like it's something like 3 or 4 times faster than the communication that comes down through the musculature. Again, because it's not having to deal with chemicals because they're really slow. Yeah, is that?
Oh, that's awesome. It's like, oh, it's really cool. I hadn't heard that before. I'm just
Okay, right. Sorry, I
yeah.
thought there was a problem with the audio. No, we're good. Okay, good information.
Yeah.
So the communication of fascia is a lot faster. It's just electrical. So for me, when you've got an electrical tissue, and if you think that just kind of bashing it as hard as you can with a foam roller, like you're saying, like just iron the knots out, that's really, it's not going to do it. It's not going to happen certainly the way you think it is. Like, yes, there is some sensory feedback and an increase in range of movement because you've drawn attention to it. If you roll really fast, then you're going to activate some certain mechanoreceptors within the tissue, and essentially you can just tighten it up. If you roll really slowly, so rolling slowly, and particularly if you roll towards the muscular tendinous junction of the muscle, so if you kind of roll towards the tendons rather than over the muscle spindles themselves, what you'll find is with movement, you can normalize the signal coming from the GTOs, the Golgi tendon organs, and they're the proprioceptors that basically send the information back to the brain and tell the brain what level of tension needs to be maintained in the muscle whilst it's under load. Okay, and then that basically can allow the muscle to can fire at an appropriate level and not overfire and just be tight. So that sensory feedback is important and definitely makes a difference. You will get a short-term change by rolling on it. I think that's just the thing that's really important, the thing to be aware of. If you're aware that you're making a short-term change so that you can go and train, great. It helps you train and you can move and you can do well. But if there's a level of dysfunction, or if it just keeps getting tight, that's happening for a reason. And if you're an athlete and you don't want your tissues to break down, well, then you need to go and investigate that. You need to go and get that, get treatment on that so you resolve the issue rather than just keep training around it.
Yeah, I like that. And I think about people who, it's a difference between, and that's how I've been using those tools recently. It's putting it in between sets. Like you're going to do a set of jumps or a round of French contrast, explosive training, and between that, do some work on your feet with the lacrosse ball or something like that, and treat it for what it is, rather than just after the session just expecting like to roll it and have this like miraculous recovery. It's a short, and it makes sense too. And if I was rolling my feet, that you had said rolling the fascia, that's really interesting. And there's more connective, the feet are more connective tissue, really. There's not a ton of muscle in there, relatively speaking. So that makes sense with the effect there versus it's just so fascinating to me how that all comes together in that.
Something that's really cool to do, if you're a coach and you've got a group of athletes, or even if you're just an individual, you can do this, or if you're training with a partner, take your foam roller and let's say check your range of movement. Let's say you're going to go with dorsiflexion. So people roll out their calves a lot of the time. So that's something that's easy to check range of movement for. You can just do dorsiflexion with your knee going toe against a wall. See if your knee can flex and hit the wall. The ankle can dorsiflex, so your knee tracks forward, touches the wall. Then you slowly progress your toe further and further away from the wall and see how far away you can get it with your knee still touching and your heel flat down on the floor. So that's a simple way to check your dorsiflexion. Check that on both legs, just get a baseline marker. Then you can go and just do foam rolling on one leg. So foam roll one gastrocnemius, one soleus out. So just foam roll one calf muscle out, and then get your partner to massage the other one and see what sort of a difference you get. So the difference that you'll get typically will be there'll be an increase in range of movement in the side that's had the massage, because that, especially if your partner is relaxed and at a lower sympathetic level of tone in the nervous system, which typically if you were to go and get a massage from a massage therapist, they're generally fairly relaxed kind of people, and they're dropping your autonomic nervous system tone down. That helps, but also you'll be getting a donation of electrons into the tissue. So, and electrons basically are, so again, talking bioelectricity, we always talk in terms of negative and positive as human beings. Our tissues need to be negative. They need to hold a net negative charge to be healthy. So when you tear something or you injure something, you kind of lose electrons. It's like you leak electrons out of the tissue, and you'll have an increased percentage of protons there, and the tissue experiences dysfunction. You can gain electrons from donation from another person. So if someone is massaging and touching that tissue, especially if they're experiencing emotions and feelings of empathy, I feel this calf and it's very tight and it feels sore, you poor thing. There'll be a donation of electrons there and you'll get a direct benefit. Okay, so that's very different what you'll get there as compared to the foam roller. So if you want to sort of try and quantify the benefit you're getting out of a foam roller versus an actual manual therapy, that's a really cool way to do it. Another one to do is just to do that on different areas of your body, but just measure the range of movement before and after. A lot of times you'll actually see the range of movement increase. You'll see the range of movement increase after you get on the foam roller, and that's something that probably that shocks a lot of people that I've shown that to, because most people tend to think that you just kind of see a foam roller, go and lie down on it, and you magically feel better. Things will magically loosen up for you, and it's not always the case. You can actually activate the muscle spindles and tighten the muscles up by rolling on them. So it's important to do it slowly. It's important to do it more towards the muscular tendinous junctions. But if you can get someone else's hands on there and change the electrical makeup, so increase the negativity, the electron content, the volume of electrons at that area, you'll change the output and you'll change the way the muscle moves.
Yeah, that's something I've thought of as a coach before too. I'm really glad you mentioned it, is like, what's my emotional state right now, and how is this impacting the environment? I mean, I've thought about not even as like doing therapy, but even just coaching in general. But it's really interesting to hear. I'd never heard of like the idea of electron transfer in therapy, but it definitely makes sense. And with the emotions of the person doing that, and just continually being aware of more than just the technique, but the total environment, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, there's just always more. There's always a lot to consider. And look, that one for me was a really big eye opener. Watching, I remember doing that on a course once, and it was, everybody were exercise physiologists, osteopaths, chiropractors, people who should really know what they were doing. And the figure that the guy who was running the course threw out was that about 70% of the time, or 70% of the people that you throw on a foam roller, they'll get tighter. And that was about what happened in the group. So I was one of the 30%, but I was doing I got a marginal change in the musculature that we worked on, but I was being very specific about just rolling out muscular tendinous junctions, going nice and slowly rather than trying to activate the spindles. So you can use foam rolling and lacrosse balls for activation. You can also use it for relaxation. So I think if you're a coach and you're going to throw your athletes onto foam rollers, it's probably just important to understand what you're trying to achieve. Yeah. Are you trying to achieve activation, or are you trying to achieve inhibition or relaxation, so that athlete can move the joint and actually perform? And if so, then you need to sort of stick to the protocols that go with each.
Yeah, I think that is fantastic and very valuable information. I'd never even heard like the speed of which and making a difference and where that's really great. And so you had mentioned a little bit about emotion, or basically what's as an empathy and the therapist. And I wanted to get into emotional state in training the athlete, or just training in general. What are the role of emotions in training, and how do emotions determine your adaptation to exercise?
Yeah, good question. I would say that emotions, they don't 100% determine your adaptation to exercise, or adaptation to movement, but they're a key determinant. So your limbic system, the limbic brain, which is your emotional brain, it's kind of where we store all of our emotional experiences and traumas and everything. That is one of the most influential and connected systems in the body, and it remembers everything. So if you've had trauma in your life, and I'll talk about this a lot with people, saying if you want to be strong and you want to be a beast, you need to heal your trauma first, because the nervous system remembers. So this is something that I see in people all the time, of constantly clearing limbic conflicts out of the body, and touching on athletic populations. And every coach and every athlete kind of either will have known this, seen this, experienced it, or fear it. And it's the career-ending injury. So the career-ending injury. So I said, this is something that every coach, athlete will have either, if they haven't experienced it, it's something that you'll know someone who's experienced it. You certainly will have heard about it. And most athletes, it's something that you either fear or you just try and put out of your mind. So the career-ending injury, let's say it's an Achilles rupture. So that an injury like that, it takes away. I mean, if it takes away your career, that's a huge thing. As far as the nervous system's concerned, that is a massive, massive event, because that's your sense of self. That's your sense of identity. So if you're kind of losing a huge part of yourself. You're losing kind of who you are. That's going to impact on your nervous system in profound ways. And you'll find that you can have, you can basically get reverberations down through the years. And I've seen this a lot. So any injury that you have that's impacted on you in an emotional way, if you've had to miss a big meet because you got injured, or if it ends your career or something along those lines, you'll experience feedback for many, many years to come. Now, that feedback can just come in terms of muscle weakness. It could come in terms of dysfunction. It could come in other ways. I've seen people experience other symptoms where, it's almost like a traumatic brain injury kind of symptoms, which I find fascinating, that, you can have a sports injury and then, to an area of the periphery, but because you experience it as an emotional trauma, it can impact on you in a similar or comparable way to the way that a traumatic brain injury could do. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And it's a great thing to be able to clear in people, because obviously then function returns. So getting back to the question of how emotions drive adaptation or determine adaptation in the body, because the limbic system is so connected, and any time there's an emotional trauma, that will project. It'll work its way out from that deep neurologic system of the limbic brain. It'll slowly kind of correlate its way through different neurologic systems. It'll work its way out into the somatic nervous system, which is our voluntary control over muscles. And you'll experience weakness or restricted range of movement, or you might experience pain in certain positions or just in certain moments. And you won't know about it. You won't know where that dysfunction or that weakness is coming from. You'll just be aware of a biomechanic fault. And so for me, this was the big thing in terms of, that light bulb moment for me of realizing that back in the day I was working with tissues sort of from a manual therapy kind of perspective and a physiotherapy kind of perspective, where I was just looking at the tissues and looking at the movement. And I could get short-term change, but a lot of times that dysfunction would return. Maybe it would be slightly different after I'd worked on it, but the dysfunction would very often return. And that was just because I wasn't able to get to whatever was deepest. I wasn't able to get to what was mediating the problem or maintaining the problem. So, and that the limbic system is huge because it's so connected. As I said, it'll just permeate its way through the nervous system, through the different layers, and eventually it'll work its way out. And as a sports person, you'll know about it as a biomechanic fault. And most times people will just view it purely as a biomechanic fault. But when you've got something that just keeps recurring, and especially when you see athletes who just get injured more often than others, and everybody knows one. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows there's an athlete who's just on the injured list more often than they should be, and it's kind of inexplicable. And it doesn't mean that their physios or their manual therapists are doing a bad job. It just means that what's maintaining the problem is at a level deeper than they're either considering or able to consider. So depending on how that emotional trauma works its way out through the nervous system, that largely determines our adaptation to exercise and to movement, because you can sort of think of it that the body's always going to go with what's easiest. And if the nervous system if it knows that there are muscles that are slightly weak, well, it's going to work its way around them, or it's going to look to try and use those muscles less. Does that kind of answer the question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a follow-up that I think, I mean, it's interesting. Like you said, the athlete who's always injured. And as coaches or trainers, I guess you could call us unofficial therapists on some level, but there's certainly a line between coaching and therapy. But how do you go about? I mean, what are ways to look at that athlete who is always injured, and there's probably something emotional holding them back? Is there any sort of like protocol or anything that's a good practice in dissecting that at all?
Yeah, look, so have you heard of EFT, so emotional freedom technique?
Yeah, I have heard of it. I haven't actually gotten to the too fine details of it though.
Okay, look, emotional freedom technique is a good thing. So I'll go on record saying I think emotional freedom technique is a good thing. For me, emotional freedom technique is very non-specific. So I don't. It's not something that I use a lot of, but just as a general recommendation. So if someone sort of wants to look a little bit, a little deeply or just a little more deeply into ways that they can get around it, if they think they're experiencing limbic trauma and that's and that's sort of playing out on the sporting field or it's playing out in athletic performance. My recommendation would be to go to someone like myself or someone, an AMM practitioner or someone in kinesiology or someone who knows how to work with the body and make the links through to the emotional brain and then clear that so you're not experiencing dysfunction at the level of the muscles. But essentially, emotional freedom technique is tapping, which releases an alternating current. So that releases, and it's that alternating current, that electricity that it releases is parasympathetic in nature. So it's very calming. It's sort of, it's very rest and restore, rest and repair, rest and digest kind of energy. So, and by tapping on certain sites and potentially by reciting, sort of relaxing and reassuring mantras, it's like a circuit breaker. So essentially, if you're experiencing an emotional trauma, and that is inhibiting or it's hindering athletic performance, there's simple little protocols, and there'll be different for each person, but you can tap on different sites like your cheekbones or on your shoulders, on your sternum, and you can think happy thoughts. And it's like it's like a circuit breaker. So it can allow your nervous system to then communicate more optimally in that particular moment. So I think, as I said, for me, I think EFT is a good thing, definitely. But the limbic system is very complex. So it's not one of those things that you can kind of just think positive thoughts and it'll all just go away. As I said, the brain just the brain remembers everything. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, so the way that I work with it is either there's two levels you go at it. And I tend to like to do both. I will sort of scan and go into the limbic brain, find the conflict, find the emotional trauma, and then find all the correlations, find where it's projecting out to the muscles, and then by introducing either an alternating current, a direct current, or an intentional stimulus, that will just normalize. It's like rebooting a computer. It'll return that circuitry back to normal, like factory settings. So I'll do that. And then there's other methods of kind of going into the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind, you can then just input into the subconscious mind and the subconscious thinking how you'd like it to be. So, you'd like, rather than having that negative thought or those traumas, your subconscious just goes to, feeling at ease or at peace or at calm or whatever it is that you'd like to introduce. And then the musculature will respond accordingly, which I find that stuff mind-blowing. That's something that I've sort of only started delving into more recently, and I find it absolutely mind-blowing that you can do that. But yeah, the limbic system is incredibly complex and incredibly well connected. And basically we can sort of, as you say, as a key determinant of adaptation, I guess we can look at it and say that any unresolved trauma is just going to drive dysfunction. Dysfunction is going to drive compensation. Compensations are going to accelerate tissue breakdown. And then once tissue starts to break down, you either get injured or you find a new way to compensate, or both. Mm-hmm. And I guess the body is amazing. The body is designed to perform at such a high level and perform for such a long time. And it's always stuck with me, the words. I've got a really good mate who's a top level sports physiologist. And I remember him telling me years ago that, in his opinion, we're designed to be able to run forever. He said there's been plenty of studies done where you can take a bone and you can impact a bone, and if everything is, if you impact it with an appropriate load, if you impact it along its preferred or its optimal axis, and you give it the force along the lines with which it's designed to carry that force, you can basically impact a bone infinitesimally. So you could, if it was running and it was a bone in your foot, you could run on that bone as long as you weren't overweight, as long as everything was lined up correctly, and as long as you were running with reasonable kind of technique, you should be able to run forever. You should be able to run, and that bone shouldn't fatigue. But he said if you overload it, if you impact that bone incorrectly, and you basically do it, in really bad ways, you can impact that bone to the point of failure, which you can say fracture with that, in less than 2,000 impacts.
Wow.
So basically, you've got something that's designed to last forever, but you could bring about a stress fracture in that bone in less than a couple of kilometers, or in less than a mile and a half. In your language, or less than a mile and a quarter in your language. And I find that mind blowing. But if everything's lined up well, and you don't have these emotional traumas that bring tissues closer to their threshold of injury, and if you impact everything the way it's supposed to, the body can do amazing things and for a long period of time.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, it brings me that. My wife bought me a book. I think it was called Iron Heart. It was like a guy who had just had, I think, heart surgery and decided to run a triathlon like on a whim or something like that. And but I mean, he was purely, his drive was off the charts. His body was not necessarily super ready, but at least he didn't have anything holding him back. And he did it, and he didn't have anything holding him back on the level of his mind. It does make me think about, like, I mean, bottom line, I love all this stuff. I think it's purely it's totally fascinating, and I think that I've heard good things about EFT. I've never done it, but I know people who have, and I've heard really good feedback from what they're doing, as well as tapping. And I like that you put the science into that, because I think that it's like everything's weird, right? Until we actually show some science behind it. Like,
100%. It's like, and people call it, look at it and say it's woo-woo, or it's this or it's that. And then until science comes in and says, oh, no, hang on, we can explain that. Then people go, oh, no, well, of course, that's the way it works. And that's, for me, that's the thing. I think we need to be open. There's plenty of things. There's a lot of things we're just not going to understand. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that we need to discount it. And for me, having been a former athlete, I think, as I was saying before, as long as it was legal, if you'd told, I don't care how weird it was, if you'd told me there was something that would give me an increase in my level of performance and as such increase my chances of winning a medal, I'm in. I'm open to looking at it, and that's the thing. And hey, science can explain it for me later. But if it gives me performance benefit and I'm not going to get disqualified, great, let's look at it.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit about one of the best moments there was. Sprint coach here in the United States, Chris Korfist, mentioned an anecdote where Douglas Heel, who is the founder of Be Activated, had a suggestion for people to yell at the top of their lungs before whatever they do. Maybe it was a vertical jump in this example. And if they yelled, "I am the greatest," before they jumped, then many of them had set a lifetime PR or personal best. And I immediately took that back and started doing it. Well, I did it myself. And I found that I on the spot within the course of 10 seconds, I improved my jump from like 29.1 to 32.8. It was crazy. It was like someone put a rocket in me. It's like this. It was a different feeling. I was a different person for a second. And then I would try it on my teams. And I found in one team particularly, like some people it helped and some people it didn't. But you could tell the people that didn't really believe it. Like they didn't really, when they said it, it was kind of like, there was a subconscious disconnect going on.
Brilliant. That's exactly correct. I think so. What you'll find is if you make a statement that is congruous with the subconscious mind, you'll experience an increase in strength. So if you've done meditation, or if you're just one of those lucky individuals who's just born just believing in themselves 100%, and look, I'm fortunate. I come from a country where I think as an athlete, we just tend to back ourselves. It's just, I was always born and coached to the idea of, you're not going to die wondering, you got to have a go. And, so just get out there and give it your best shot. So, the self-belief is huge. So if you're one of those individuals that's already got that deep level of self-belief, if you go and make a statement, and this is so shouting, it's going to be even more powerful because you're introducing emotion into it then. If you go and say something that is in your conscious mind is a conscious mind statement, and you're adding emotion to it, and think of emotions are a fuel source. So basically emotions are a fuel source that drive energy. So you're making a conscious mind statement, you're adding fuel to it. And if that aligns, if that's congruous with what the subconscious mind thinks, basically what you've just done is you've just lined up all of those systems together, and you're going to experience an increase in strength. If you don't believe in yourself, so this is what you were just saying about, those athletes, or some, you could see the ones that it wasn't going to work on. I could see the ones that, you can see the reaction. You can see the self-belief. All of a sudden, it's like that subconscious just comes out. and the ones who don't believe it, they don't have that level of self-belief, you're making them shout out something that is incongruous with what their deep subconscious mind believes, and that creates a disconnect. So then, you may even experience a decrease in strength. So, look, I would say it's something that you want to just try out in training first. Don't just try it out for the first time on game day or comp day, and just make sure that if it works for you, then fantastic. For me, as an athlete, I don't care if I wouldn't have cared if it was something that would have seemed embarrassing. If it was going to make me run faster or jump higher, then I'm in. Great. But yeah, so that's basically how it works. You're aligning up the conscious mind, adding a fuel source, which is emotion, and then you're aligning that with your subconscious mind. And so you put all of that together, and you're going to experience an output at the level of the musculature, and that's awesome.
Yeah, it was not too long after that. I remember I was reading the book Legacy by James Kerr, talking about the All Blacks and with the haka and stuff like that. And that stuff, like, it makes your before it got too super trendy, and it's still powerful, but that stuff makes your hair stand on end. Like it does.
It does. Look, and that's a talking point in this country because we have a very strong rivalry with the New Zealand All Blacks and their haka. I love the haka. I think the haka is amazing, and it's an incredible thing. But it's an unfair advantage. You basically, the opposition teams need to just stand face to face and have this other team go through a war cry and a war dance, and they can scream and pump themselves up whilst inflicting psychological damage onto their rivals. And the code of conduct states in that game that the opposition team's not allowed to do anything. So they've just got to take these psychological body blows and then go and start the match.
Yes, exactly.
So as a real world example of that, I don't know, for the probably the small percentage of people that follow rugby in that country, in America, in the recent Rugby World Cup, England absolutely smashed the All Blacks in their semi-final, and so England formed a wedge. They sort of formed a wedge and almost and walked forward and kind of surrounded. They walked to try and surround the All Blacks, and the referees were trying to stop them. And the England players, you could see them just said, basically, get lost. The referee, you're not refereeing the game yet. Game hasn't started. And it was silent, but it was really strong and really powerful. And for those guys, that was them sort of, that was their psychological moment of I guess, pushing back against that that war cry, which brings a lot of teams undone. And that was beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I'll try to, I'm going to try to find that on YouTube, and I'll make sure I put it in the show notes, because I that stuff just is, that stuff is awesome. And I think it is unfair. Yeah, someone gets to basically yell and dance at you and try to intimidate you. You can't do anything, or unless you. And it's kind of like they kind of trademarked it in an unofficial way. I mean, it'd be kind of to do it back would be kind of like it's just. Yeah, I definitely get it. I'll try to put that in the show notes. Absolutely. I do. Maybe if we have time, I'd like to talk about one more thing, and that's learning. So are there some ways, whether it be, everything's a skill, right? Strength, shooting a basketball, jumping over a high jump bar, any of these things. What are some ways that we can improve the ability of our brain to learn, and then particularly on that physical skill level?
Yeah. So let's talk about it in the context of movement. So basically, I'm going to back up. Let's strip back a level. So the way our bodies work. So the brain is a small organ. It's roughly 2% of your total body mass. Okay. And it exerts a huge metabolic demand over the body. So it exerts a metabolic demand of around about 20%, and that's just when that's just in the course of normal operating. So normal driving. It's demanding about 20% of the total metabolic demand of the body. So you've got this tiny little organ which weighs less than 2% of the total, and it's demanding more than 20% of the total energy to keep the body alive. Now, the way the brain has evolved is basically to try and increase your chances of survival. So its number one priority is always survival. It'll do everything it possibly can to keep you alive, including shut itself down. So it will try and just run on automated programs and just habitual programming, because it knows that if it just runs these programs, it costs a lot less energy. So it needs oxygen, glucose, and activation to survive. So as long as things are activating, then it's the use it or lose it concept. And if it gets enough oxygen and enough glucose, it can function. And because it's demanding so much energy, it knows that if it runs out of food, if you're not able to find food soon enough, then the organism could die. Now, I'm always saying to people, we didn't evolve with a supermarket across the road. We didn't evolve with a ready available food supply, across the road or down the street. We used to have to go out and hunt and gather to try and get food. So if your brain was going to pay attention, if it was going to sort of calculate and compute things, and as soon as it starts to calculate, compute, and pay attention, the energy cost goes up enormously. So it starts to burn more energy. And this tiny little organ, which is demanding a huge amount of energy already, if it increases its energy demands, then the amount of time that it has available to survive before it runs out of fuel and dies comes down. So it knows that it can increase its survival chances if it just goes on to automated or habitual programming. It's basically if it just switches off. So it knows that it increases its survival chances by switching off. So we've got this really powerful drive deep down in our psyche, or deep down even in neurophysiology, to drive us to not pay attention, just to run on habitual programming. And that habitual programming is something that we build in over the course of our lifetime, and it's usually by around about age 30 that's kind of pretty complete. So you've got this habitual program. So when we talk about trying to learn new things, the way we learn is by paying attention. Okay, if you can get your brain to really pay attention to something, it can start to learn. And you'll see this again as a coach in the context of movement. You'll see this with athletes. When that brain starts to run out of oxygen or starts to get low on glucose, it's going to start to experience that drive to switch off. And you'll see your athletes lose attention. All of a sudden, they'll find something in their peripheral vision just looks really interesting, and they need to look away inexplicably, or you'll see that their gaze drifts away because their brain's telling them that their survival chances are going to be increased if they switch off. So the way that if you can drive focused attention towards movement, then you increase the learning capabilities. Now, it's very difficult to drive focused attention into movement if you just give the brain a habituated movement pattern. So if you give the brain a squat and you're trying to correct the squat, and the brain's done the squat 10,000 times previously and it's already got a program for it, you can try and pay attention to it, but the brain is going to be sending these messages saying, we've got a program for this. I already know how to do this. I already know how to do this, and let's just run the program. So it's very difficult. It becomes more difficult to learn and to make changes when you just give a habituated stimulus or a familiar stimulus. So if you can give novel stimuli, so even with something that's already familiar, like a squat pattern, if that athlete's already performed that squat pattern tens of thousands of times, you could change their footwear. You could change the surface on which they're doing it. You could change the loading. You could give it an uneven loading. You could add bands that are pulling the athlete or pulling the individual in certain different ways, or just exerting different vectors of force on the individual and forcing the nervous system to figure it out, force the nervous system to pay attention to the sensory feedback that it's getting. And when that brain's paying attention, then all of a sudden you can start introducing different cues. You can introduce the different coaching cues that you want, and you'll start to get an improved response. And essentially, then what you're doing is you're driving neuroplastic change. You're driving you're increasing the connectedness around that circuit, those neural circuits that relate to that particular movement. And to do that, we need a few things. But the number one thing is attention. Okay? And if you can drive that attention, then you're going to get the brain paying attention to the sensory feedback, and you're going to increase your chances of forming new synaptic connections around that particular movement.
Yeah, it seems when it's novel, that attention comes on like multiple levels, in the sense of a thought. I was just having this thought today of warming up track sprinters with typically a warm-up might be they run over like little mini hurdles about 4 inches high, spaced maybe 6 feet apart, and they use that as a warm-up for their stride. But warm-up, I was like, well, and I've done similar stuff to this in the past, but what if you had those little hurdles at very random intervals for the warm-up? Like it's something that you have to be extremely focused because each one is not like the next. And I've heard of coaches doing, I mentioned Chris Corfus for him, and another coach, Dan Fichter, would like put little pieces of track between those hurdles as well to force something that's different that the body pays attention to differently. But
beautiful.
I was thinking, like, if you did these hurdles in a little subtly different patterns before the main workout, like you were just saying, now you have better attention. Like now there's attention, and now the body at that point, then the body would be more receptive to technical attention, cueing, awareness, and all that type of thing.
Something that I think that's fantastic. I think it's a challenge for any coach. If you're actually going to pay attention as a coach to this sort of stuff, the challenge then becomes you're trying to add more novel stimuli into your athletes' training programs and into their training regime, which makes it more difficult to program because you're, as the coach, basically what that approach to it is telling you that you need to do different things and do different things nearly every single time. That makes it's a lot easier just to program for repetition. It's a lot easier to say you're going to do 3 sets of 10 of this, 3 sets of 10 of that. You're going to do X, Y, and Z exercises, and you'll do those 5 times a week. And that's really easy to program for. To then throw in all of these different variables that are going to drive this change for us, that's a lot of extra work, a lot of extra thinking. So something that I do a lot with people, and this is all levels because it's relevant and valid for everyone, is what you need to drive neuroplastic changes. And we've got two different types of neuroplasticity. You've got adaptive neuroplasticity, which is good, and maladaptive neuroplasticity, which is bad. Maladaptive neuroplasticity is what you're going to experience as a result of an injury. So that's essentially we're talking about, compensation and whatnot. But adaptive neuroplasticity is what we're going to experience when we're improving function and when we're on the way up. And what you need for that is 3 key things. And so if you're a coach, I'd definitely write this down. Even if you're an individual, I'd write this down. You need attention, you need urgency, and you need a certain degree of alertness. So when I was competing in Taekwondo, and again, I didn't really know I couldn't have explained the difference in what this was doing, but I spent some time at the High Performance Center in Spain. I spent a year training over there with those guys, and that was Spain was number 2 in the world back then, and they were the High Performance Center there in Barcelona was kind of the world mecca of Taekwondo, and that was the place that everybody wanted to be at. What we used to do all the time, we'd play these different games. We'd play, dodgeball, or we'd play, like bull rush kind of game, or we'd play football or something just as a warm up. And so what you're driving attention to an unfamiliar or an unfamiliar game. You are driving this level of alertness because you want to win. It was a fun little warm up game that we played, but there was a really high level of alertness. And there's a consequence. You're playing for points, and everybody there is highly competitive. So there's a degree of urgency. So we played these warm-up games for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then when the coach is then going to try and give us new technical drills, everybody's really switched on, paying attention. Everybody's everybody's nervous system was in a state where forming new synaptic connections was made more easy by the warm-up drills that we've been doing, because our nervous systems were in such a state that they were ready to release increased amounts of acetylcholine and dopamine, which you kind of need to form these new synaptic connections. So it makes that process much easier for the body to elicit, and then performance improves because you're learning at a faster rate. So I kind of do that with the people that I work with. I'll have just these. It can be any kind of game that you want, but there needs to be a consequence to it that could be a score, it could be a penalty, it could be any kind of little consequence, but something that's going to drive urgency. There needs to be that level of alertness, and it kind of needs to be a bit different, because if you play the same game over and over again, if you're a football player, then just doing a little football game warm-up, whilst that's good, you're not going to place the same degree of attention on that little warm-up game as if you went and played soccer. That would be a very different thing. You need to concentrate on that because they're different skills. So anything that you can do that drives those 3 things, attention, urgency, and alertness, is going to make that body more receptive and more able to change itself in neuroplastic ways. And then you're going to find that the athletes can start to upgrade their circuitry. They're going to be able to develop more neural connections around the movements that you want, which basically means that they're going to have a greater level of movement variability, and they're going to be able to, there'll be a better chance of finding the optimal movement strategy that you're looking to try and give them. So for me, that's something that I do all the time when I'm trying to introduce a new skill or a new movement to anybody, or if I'm teaching them, we'll be doing something along those lines for at least a couple of minutes beforehand.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's something that I just yesterday I had a group of, and I've been thinking about this really for the last several months after I had a guest, Rafe Kelley, who's a natural movement and parkour teacher up in.
I love Rafe's work. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And and so ever since talking to him, I'm like, yes, my athletes need to be at a particular emotional state before we really do work. Otherwise, what are we really, we're suboptimal, and so I like that you put those words, attention, urgency, and alertness on it. And it makes all the sense in the world. Just yesterday I was, we played a modified, because we do keep away sometimes, like guys will come in and they'll play a little keep away type game with the tennis ball before they get started. And this, I don't know, I just decided, well, let's play with the volleyball this time. It's just, let's just make those little changes to try to get them in that state where now we're ready to train and we're at a heightened level. And I also think too about, even like you said, a person who's not paying attention, like you call the group in and the athletes are looking at you, but there's always that one person who's kind of staring off into space, right? And so it's almost like you really, that's such a huge thing to look at. And yeah, I did have a quick follow-up. If you're doing like a one-on-one, for people who might be doing one-on-ones out there, it's easy. With groups, you play games, right? Like I used to play ultimate frisbee with my track team for 20 minutes before we do our sprint stuff. But if it's one-on-one, if you have a one-on-one client, any tips or ideas there?
Yeah, look, there's all kinds of different things. So again, some of the games that we used to play back when I was doing Taekwondo in Spain and whatnot, and I've integrated those. I've got a bunch of different things that I do with balls and with sticks and all kinds of different things. One of the ones that I've always liked and enjoyed, I call it chest touches or knee touches. Chest touches are not so good with female athletes, so I tend to go for knee touches. But it's basically just the agility and reaction game. So imagine if you and I are playing a game, we square off against each other, and if I can tag you on the chest, if I can touch your chest, I score a point, and maybe that costs you one burpee, or maybe that costs you a push-up. I've got a couple of guys that do boxing, and that'll cost them a punch in the ribs from the other guy that they've lost against. But again, it requires speed and agility and reactions. They have to concentrate on it, and there's urgency. They have that level of alertness, and they just have to pay attention to it. You can do the same thing with just touching the knees. So same thing. If I can touch your knees, I score just with a fingertip, I score a point. If you can touch my knee, you score a point. A couple of minutes of that, and you're well and truly warmed up, and the system's highly alert, and you've set the chemical environment within the brain that's going to facilitate the forming of new neural connections, and that's beautiful.
Oh, I love it. I actually, that game, I was doing a dryland session for a group of swimmers, and we happened to be in a big wrestling room. And I had been doing a lot of the typical stuff, and I was in the locker room using the bathroom before we started, and I saw some wrestlers in there, some like real high level wrestlers, and I was like, hey, is there any like game, that like wrestling type game that's really safe that we could do? And he said basically just that you have to touch the other person's knee. And so I took it too far, being me. We had a huge tournament of doing that. and I told them no diving either, but of course some guys took that too far. But it was a blast, and they definitely got tired. But it was awesome. I mean, the attention, the focus, the fun, like laughing, it was off the charts. So using something like that for warm up would be absolutely, I mean, that stuff is awesome. And yeah, Rafe, like a lot of his roughhousing type stuff, I'm trying to learn more about that. I think it's all just takes us to such a good place before we get started with our work.
Yeah, and I think the stuff that Rafe's doing is amazing. I think he's really onto some stuff. All the games that they play, like it's exactly the way we just explained it. We can put a scientific or a neuroscientific explanation to it, and then we sort of come back to, wow, these fun games and this social engagement, and and the smiles and the happy emotions and everything. It's setting the stage for optimal performance, and it's setting the stage for us to basically improve the brain and the nervous system in exactly the ways that science is saying that we should. And so there's people out there, I guess, like Rafe and others who are really getting it right. And if introducing happy emotions, introducing that social engagement where you're drawing on the energy of others, and it's all that same stuff we talked about earlier with contact, and then you're driving that attention, alertness, and urgency, and you're making the nervous system receptive to change rather than just that nervous system just wanting to lock itself into that habituated pattern that it's already got. It's already got programmed. For me, that's the smart way to go. And again, as an athlete, I was always all about, look, work hard, but you got to work smart. I'm all up for hard work, but it's got to be intelligent. I don't want to just bash my head against the wall and go nowhere. We're going to we'll do a lot better if we do hard work and we're intelligent about it. And that's kind of that's the same approach now that I have with all this neuro work. Hopefully anyone who's listening to this has managed to get a few takeaway points and get some benefit out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I learned a ton, so I'm sure everyone listening will as well. How can people find you or reach you, Scott, on internet, social media, whatever you're up to?
Yeah, so look, Instagram is probably the main channel that I'm on, and so I'm the Brain Guy on Instagram with 2 dots, so the.brain.guy, and then the same handle on Facebook. So if you want to contact me or follow there, that's kind of where you'll see the bulk majority of the information that I put out. And I guess the things that I'm up to is I work with another company called Integrated Vitality Retreats, and so we're basically taking people away and either healing or just optimizing at these retreats. So they've sort of said if anyone wants to get involved and have a look at one of those retreats, we're doing one in Bali in about a month's time, which will be amazing. And so that will be removing a huge amount of limiting beliefs for people. So aligning that subconscious mind, like we talked about, align the subconscious mind with the conscious drive, and then you'll see the output increase in the nervous system, and certainly you'll see the flow and the way things unfold in life after that. So that's kind of recommendable for just about anybody who's looking to improve themselves. And they've sort of said, because I think the early bird special for that one ends today, the day we're recording it, but they've said they'll extend that for anyone who says that they've listened to this podcast. Then that one will go through for another week.
All right, fantastic, Scott. That sounds amazing. Thank you again for being on the show, and I really appreciate it all.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I hope yourself and anybody who's listening managed to get some real benefit out of it.
Thanks for tuning in for another show. We appreciate your listenership. If you enjoy what you're hearing, you can support us by heading over to iTunes and leaving us a rating and review. Would absolutely appreciate that. Also important, visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology. They have a great blog and the best of in many categories of training and performance, such as the Freelap timing system, gym aware and flex unit, K-Box, muscle stimulators, contact grids, force plates. I could go on. Great company, and we are happy to have their support. All right, that does it for this week. We'll see you guys next week with another great guest.